On the day my mother died, she gripped my wrist and told me I wasn't her son, that I'd been stolen from a Manhattan penthouse in 1985. A truth that didn't just break a family, it detonated the life I thought I'd earned. By nightfall, I was homeless, disowned, and clutching DNA papers naming me heir to billions, while a private investigator leaned close and spoke 7 words that turned horror into betrayal with bloodlines attached. The woman who raised me was my father's sister. You're watching Revenge Files. Subscribe for a new twist daily. I grew up to the sound of factory whistles instead of birds. If you've never woken up in Cleveland's industrial district with the taste of metal in your throat, you might not understand how a boy can measure time by shift changes and sirens. Our duplex on Stockton Avenue sat between 2 sleeping brick warehouses, both windows boarded, both echoing like empty lungs. Dorothy, my mother, or the woman I believed was, kept our little place scrubbed with dollar store bleach until the floor smelled like a decision. Dennis, my older brother, learned to fix carburetors before he learned to apologize. Marlene, my younger sister, could count the bills in a purse without looking. Me? I could see numbers without writing them down. I kept the checkbook, called utility companies, stretched 3 digits into 4 weeks while Dorothy stared past my shoulder whenever she said, "Nathan's the smart one." In March of 2023, I was 38 and a warehouse supervisor at the Thurman Distribution Center. I'd been there 15 years, the kind of man who knows which forklift whines when you turn left and which dock door sticks in January. When Dorothy's pancreatic cancer took the last of her weight, I drove her to Cleveland General and sat in waiting rooms that smelled like disinfectant and old fear. I remember the monitor's nervous beeps and how the room's shadows pooled under the bed rails like something living. Dennis stood at the window and checked his phone. Marlene sat in the corner filing her nails, her grocery store name tag still pinned crooked from her morning shift. I held Dorothy's hand, the knuckles like glass beads. I wanted to believe the drugs were a veil we could lift if we asked politely. Her eyes snapped clear. She looked straight into me as if I were a mirror she finally recognized. "Nathan," she rasped, pulling me close enough to smell the bitter sour of medicine. "You're not my son." I tried to ease back, to fetch a nurse, but her fingers tightened with the last strength she had. "I stole you from a billionaire's family in 1985. Your real name is Christopher Rothwell. Your father owns half of Manhattan." The heart monitor stuttered. Nurses moved with practiced urgency. Dennis's head came up. Marlene's file paused mid-stroke. 20 minutes later, Dorothy lay very still, and the room stopped pretending it could help. "Did she just say—" Dennis didn't finish the sentence. He shoved me as the nurses asked us to wait in the hallway. Grease from his hands printed my collar. "I knew something was wrong with you," he said, nostrils flaring the way they did when a bolt stripped, and he needed somebody to blame. Marlene looked at her phone. "Holy Sterling Rothwell," she breathed, reading. "Real estate mogul, missing infant, 1985. Case never solved." She looked up at me with a kind of awe I'd only seen on Christmas morning when a gift wasn't for her. "That's you." The official pronouncement of death felt like a technicality. We were already in the parking lot, Cleveland winds slicing through jackets as Dennis pushed me toward the sidewalk. He reached into my jacket, took my wallet, and fanned the bills. "This is for the funeral," I said. "For 38 years of freeloading," he corrected, tucking the money into his pocket like a lesson. "And for pretending to be our brother." Security escorted me off hospital grounds after Dennis told them I was a stranger harassing a grieving family. He said Dorothy had 2 children. He said my name was a lie the hospital would find in the records. He didn't have to be right. He only had to be loud. By sundown I had no keys, no truck. "Harold's truck stays with family," Dennis said. "No apartment because Mr. Chen, my landlord, accepted a phone call from a cousin who called himself a lawyer and said words like fraudulent tenancy." In 10 minutes I tried to decide which pants were worth more than the pants I was wearing. I took a photo of Dorothy off the wall, the one where she's at the kitchen table squinting like the light is asking a hard question. The bank froze my accounts, an abundance of caution that felt like an abundance of gravity. I carried 2 trash bags into the Burke lakefront shelter and learned the rules. Be back before curfew, no alcohol, don't start fights, don't invite trouble, Don't ask for seconds unless there are seconds. Trouble doesn't need an invitation in places like that. It knows the door code. 3 months blur in a shelter, the same tray, the same arguments, the same veteran muttering at a corner table like he's negotiating with ghosts. What stays crisp are the humiliations you think you've prepared for and the mercies you didn't ask for. I learned which bodega throws out sandwiches before the meat turns, which stairwells are safe to sleep in if you miss curfew, which to avoid because a man with a spiral tattoo waits there to collect interest. I found work where I could, hauling for cash, cleaning out foreclosed houses that smelled like boiled spaghetti and lost arguments, scraping nicotine off bathroom walls that never quite came clean. At night I tried to make sense of the confession. I counted backwards from 38 to an infant in a newspaper clipping. I pictured a Manhattan skyline I'd only ever seen in movies. I tried on the name Christopher like a suit I couldn't afford and didn't believe would fit. They found me at the end of the line on a Thursday, 2 men in suits that made the room quieter just by entering it. "Nathan Bridgewater?" the older one asked. He had winter hair and careful eyes. "Depends who's asking," I said, because survival turns everything into a test. "Roger Blackstone," he said, offering a card. "Private investigator. Manhattan address. This is Anthony Corville, a state attorney." Half the line turned to look. Men in $1,000 suits don't come to Burke unless somebody died or somebody won. I set my tray down because my hands shook. "We've been searching for you," Corville said. His voice had the softness of a man who spends more time in boardrooms than kitchens. He carried a briefcase heavy with papers and consequences. Blackstone held up an evidence bag with a coffee cup inside. "From the bodega on East 55th, he said. "We ran DNA. It's a match to records we've kept for 38 years. Records for what?" I asked, although I knew. "For the son of Sterling Rothwell," Corville said. "Your biological father, the Marriott downtown, had windows like flat mirrors staring out over Lake Erie. They booked a conference room so a man who hadn't owned a clean shirt in a week could gaze at his life organized into labeled piles. Birth certificates, hospital bracelets, news clippings about a gala in 1985 that ended with a nursery door opening onto a night that never returned what it took. Photographs of a baby with green eyes and a woman whose smile was an answer. A man with my jawline holding me like a promise. "Mr. Rothwell," Blackstone said gently. I flinched. The name felt like someone else's ring on my finger. "Your father owns Rothwell Real Estate Holdings. 43 commercial properties in Manhattan. Current valuation, approximately $2.4 billion. My mother?" The question came before I could arrange it into something braver. "Patricia Rothwell," Corville said, sliding a photo across. The eyes matched mine like a reflection. "Deceased. Car accident in 1988. He let that settle then. Your father never stopped looking. I thought of the foundation Dorothy stared past when she said I was smart. I thought of the numbers that said yes or no to rent. I thought of a man who paid investigators for almost 4 decades because grief wouldn't cash out." "There's more," Blackstone said. "Your father is dying. Stage 4 liver cancer. Days, maybe weeks. He wants to see you. He has made arrangements, legal and otherwise." "What kind of arrangements?" "The irrevocable kind," Corville said, and the word dropped into the room like a sealed envelope. Teterboro's tarmac shimmered at sunset, and Manhattan rose from the horizon like a promise somebody intended to keep. I wore a suit from the hotel gift shop. It fit like it had been tailored by good intentions. We rode an elevator that opened directly into a penthouse that overlooked Central Park like a map you could touch. A nurse met us with the professional kindness of someone who witnesses endings for a living. "He's lucid," she said. "For now." Sterling looked smaller than his photographs because the camera never knows what later will take from a man. But his eyes, sharp as broken glass and twice as honest, found mine and didn't let go. "Christopher," he said, and my chest answered to a name I'd never worn out loud. He reached for my hand. "Bones under skin, tendons like wire. Let me look at you." We talked like men who had to rush through 38 years before the medication dimmed the lights. He wanted to know everything. Cleveland winters, the smell of steel dust, the way Dorothy would flinch when I did math in my head, The time Dennis threw me into a snowbank for telling him he was wrong about a timing belt. He apologized for things he couldn't have prevented and things he tried to. He said a father knows. He said he'd never believed a river could carry away a son without leaving something at the bank to find. I told him about Burke Lakefront. He cried, and I turned my face away so he wouldn't spend his strength comforting me. "Tell him," he said to Blackstone when the nurse adjusted a drip and the lines in his forehead deepened. Blackstone took out a folder like a priest reaching for a psalm. "We investigated Dorothy Bridgewater's past," he said. "Her maiden name wasn't Wilson. It was Rothwell." The room changed temperature. The city outside the windows kept glittering like it didn't care. "My half-sister," Sterling said, mouth hardening around the word. "Father's shame. Housekeeper in 1955. Money to make it vanish. It never does." Dorothy had found out the truth at 18, Blackstone explained. She'd taken $50,000 to disappear and returned under a false name to work 2 years in the house that had written her out of its history. She watched Sterling marry Patricia. She watched my mother's belly grow. She watched me sleeping and decided possession would cure exclusion. In her leather journal found in a box of Avon catalogues in her Cleveland apartment, she'd written in cramped, furious lines that if she raised the boy, the money would still return to her family, to the name that had rejected her. Sterling coughed blood into a folded cloth and waved the nurse away. "2 things," he said, gripping my hand with a strength borrowed from memory. "First, as of this morning, everything is signed over to you. I'm not giving you money. I'm giving you a duty. You don't owe me for it. You owe the world because you can—" He swallowed. "Second, Dorothy's notes mention others, not just her. Women who took infants from houses where nobody would suspect them. Nannies, housekeepers, she named 3, Linda, Susan, Marie. Find them. Find the children they stole. Give back what was taken where you can. Help people make peace where you can't." He died 2 weeks later on a Thursday morning in July 2023, whispering my mother's name into a room that knew her face only from photographs. The funeral looked like a finance magazine exploded into velvet. The chapel's air smelled like lilies and expensive grief. CEOs cried in quiet corners. Politicians asked my assistant for meetings. I stood at the front and tried to recognize the man in the portraits from the man who called me son because he refused to let anyone convince him otherwise. When the receiving line thinned, Dennis and Marlene appeared in formal wear that fit like borrowed lies. "We were emotional," Dennis began, eyes sliding everywhere but mine. "Mom's confession." Marlene said family 3 times like she was trying to unlock a door with a password. "We raised you," she said. "We're the ones who—" "You took the last $300 I had," I said, "and the room's expensive air got colder. You called security and told them I was a fraud. You left me outside with a plastic bag and a question that could break a spine. I'm not your brother." Dorothy made sure of it. Security hovered. I lifted a hand. "They're leaving." They did. What they didn't see was the check I had couriered to each of them 6 months later for $50,000. Not because they were owed anything, but because I needed to decide who I was without waiting for a judge or a crowd. Dennis cashed his within an hour. Marlene mailed hers back shredded, with a note that read, "I hope you choke on your billions." I had the note framed and hung it in a bathroom nobody else uses. I like reminders that money doesn't mend character, it magnifies the break. You don't inherit $2.4 billion and simply move in. You are moved. Surrogates caught in New York County smelled like wood polish and old arguments. Corville shepherded documents across counters where clerks could tell you a man's soul by the way he signed. We met the board. We met lenders who wanted to shake the new owner's hand and smell for fear. We met a CFO named Grace Lee who looked at me like a spreadsheet and said, "If you don't know the difference between gross and net operating income by Friday, someone will eat you. If you do, you might eat back." So I learned. Cap rates and lease-up schedules, why one elevator hums and another rattles, and why a rattle on the 15th floor might be a 6-figure problem. I walked roofs and boiler rooms. I learned the names of night porters because you learn more from the person changing the trash bag at 2 in the morning than you do from a man who brings a pen with a logo. I took meetings with tenants who never thought they'd speak to Rothwell directly, and I discovered that if you return a deli owner's call within an hour, word gets around that the new guy might be dangerous in a useful way. The first thing I did that cost real money was cut a check to the Burke Lakefront shelter for $10 million. Anonymous. Mrs. Holstead, the director who once handed me an extra blanket and pretended she hadn't, burst into tears when we met in her office, which was smaller than my penthouse bathroom and twice as important. "Nathan," she said, then corrected herself, embarrassed. "Christopher." "Nathan's fine," I said. "He's the man who needed you." The second thing I did was build the Patricia Rothwell Foundation with a $100 million endowment and a narrow mission. Find the children stolen by people like Dorothy and put families in rooms where they can decide what to do with truth. Blackstone took the director job because hunting missing pieces had become his vocation. He built a team of investigators who think like thieves, search like saints, and file reports like litigators. They studied DOJ data on infant abductions by non-family caregivers in the 80s. They learned the shadows where paper trails blur. They worked with a cold case detective in Westchester who doesn't understand retirement. They convinced a retired FBI profiler to consult for free because she never got over a case with a crib and no child. Patterns emerged. Between 1980 and 1990, 17 wealthy families reported infants kidnapped who were never recovered. In 12 of those cases, a nanny or housekeeper resigned abruptly within weeks of the abduction and left town. Dorothy's journal, angry, meticulous, mentioned 3 women by first name: Linda, Susan, Marie. We found Michael first. Detroit, January 2024. Thompson on the name tag at a stamping plant. 29 years old. He cleaned his hands with orange pumice scrub that never quite takes the smell away. DNA said he was Michael Pearson, the son of a pharmaceutical executive who'd spent his fortune searching after the media moved on. The reunion wasn't a commercial. It was 2 men in an office that smelled like machine oil and coffee saying, "I'm sorry, and I'm glad you're alive," in loops until their throats hurt. Then Jennifer. Rural Kentucky, a house with 3 porches and a view of a field that didn't forgive. Susan had raised her like Dorothy raised me, with distance where tenderness should be, with a secret rattling behind the dishes. Jennifer's biological parents had kept a nursery intact for 25 years, like time would forgive their hope. When they met, Jennifer's mother cried the way a person cries when water returns to a well. But love doesn't erase timelines. We paid for therapy before we paid for travel. Repair, we learned, needs craft. Marie broke me. She didn't steal a baby. She took twins. She kept one in Phoenix, sold the other to a desperate couple across the border who believed an agency story that couldn't withstand daylight. 29 years later, in a conference room under humming fluorescence, 2 women faced each other with faces that had been split and raised separately. They wore the same brand of running shoes. They both hated cilantro. They cried and then laughed at the coincidence of both thinking cilantro tasted like soap. One said, "I felt like I was missing someone my whole life," and the other said, "Me too," and the room spun a different kind of gravity. Not every door we knock on opens to a good ending. We found a man in Nevada who'd built a life on a new name and didn't want the old one back. We honored that. We found a woman in Florida whose biological father was dead, whose mother didn't want to revisit the crime because believing the lie had saved her from a grief she wasn't equipped to survive. We paid for counselors and mediators. We learned to stop filming reunions unless everyone in the room wanted a camera. We learned a story can feed a cause and still starve a person if you aren't careful. Dennis sued me in September 2024 for $50 million in emotional damages related to the loss of a familial relationship. My lawyer, who bills in 6-minute increments and smiles once a quarter, argued that the relationship in question had been lost when Dennis shoved me into a vending machine outside a morgue. The judge dismissed the case so fast the court reporter barely warmed up. Dennis left a voicemail the next day that started with "You know who I am" and ended with a threat my security team logged, transcribed and neutralized. Marlene didn't sue. She disappeared into a Florida marriage with a man who sells promises disguised as investments. I got a Christmas card addressed to the billionaire brother who forgot us, which would have been funny if she hadn't used glitter that lodged in my carpet and reminded me of her for weeks. I threw it away and kept the memory because I've learned not everything needs framing. Between meetings and rooftops and surrogates court and security briefings about threats I didn't know existed, I started therapy. The therapist's office had a view that looked into other offices, and for 6 weeks all I could think about was how many lives were doing this same work at the same time with different details. I told her about Dorothy's distant tenderness, about Harold's hands like refrigerators, about the night we ate mac and cheese 4 days in a row, and Dorothy said, "We're saving," like it was a game, and I didn't know we were playing because rent was due. I told her about Sterling's apology, and how apologies from dying men feel like gifts and weights at once. I told her I wanted to be a man who could hold both without dropping the one that didn't make noise. She asked who I was if nobody needed me to be anything. I didn't have an answer for weeks. Then one afternoon I sat in Sterling's leather chair, the one that still smells faintly of cedar and something expensive, and watched snow quilt the city. The glass made the storm look gentle. I remembered the lake effect squalls in Cleveland that sandblasted your cheeks with ice crystals until you questioned your decision to be outside at all. I realized the chair wasn't power, it was vantage. It's what you see that changes you. So I wrote letters I didn't send. One to Dorothy, where I said the thing I couldn't say at her bedside, that I understood how envy curdles love and that understanding isn't forgiveness. One to Patricia, where I told her I see her eyes every morning and I'm doing something with the money her husband built so that lost children come home if they want to. One to Sterling, where I wrote that I would spend my life making sure he wasn't the last father who got to say son again before it was too late. We built more than a foundation. We built a call center in a nondescript midtown floor where the ringtone is a soft chime instead of a shriek. We trained operators to speak to people whose truths have splinters. We hired former social workers who understand how a sentence can shatter a room. We partnered with a lab that can run a deoxyribonucleic acid panel at cost, and a court liaison who can move a name change through the right window without a person losing their job because the HR software doesn't know what to do with the past. We learned to work quietly. Not every case needs the lights. Some need a kitchen table and coffee. Some need a hotel room paid in cash. Some need nothing from us but a phone number in case courage arrives at 2 a.m. 43 children. That's the number we put on the board in July 2025 after one of our investigators found a woman in Tulsa who always hated birthdays because something about candles felt like a countdown. 43 reunions or revelations, 43 corrections in the ledger of loss, some joyful, some complicated, all necessary. People hear Billionaire and assume you sleep without alarms. I sleep with 2, one for morning, one for memory. The night after we found number 43, I dreamed about Dorothy. She stood at the kitchen table staring at me with those eyes that were not mine, and were, because they were Sterling's sister's eyes. I asked her if it was worth it. Stealing a child to steal a fortune. She didn't answer. Dreams don't owe you closure. I woke up and donated another $5 million to Burke Lakefront for an on-site psychiatric clinic because men in line need more than seconds. Are you Nathan or Christopher? A reporter asked me at a fundraiser, smiling like she'd rehearsed catching me off guard. Yes, I said, because Nathan knows how to make a countertop dinner feed 4 and how to listen at 2 a.m. when the furnace decides it hates you. Nathan knows the names of the men who sweep lobby floors and likes to talk to them about their kids. Nathan speaks fluent. We'll make it work. Christopher knows how to sign a wire for 8 figures and mean it. Christopher knows how to look a lender in the eye and say no in a way that tells him you understand exactly what you're declining. Christopher knows that security isn't safety and that safety isn't guaranteed by glass or guards. I'm both. I'm also the space between them where decent choices live. Revenge used to be a picture in my mind. Dennis on the other side of a courtroom. Marlene reading headlines that turned her stomach. That picture faded. I discovered there's a more dangerous satisfaction than humiliation, repair. Taking what was used to harm and turning it into a tool for making something hold. Returning people to themselves, paying for counselors who sit with families while a truth rearranges furniture that's been in the same place for decades. I visit the shelter whenever I can. I park 2 blocks away and walk past the same cracked sidewalk, the same convenience store where the coffee tastes like coins and desperation. The same director greets me. She calls me Nathan when nobody's listening and Mr. Rothwell when they are. We stand in the kitchen and talk about meal counts and the way the new walk-in cooler hums right when it should. We talk about the men who left and return sometimes to say they got an apartment or a job or a dog. We talk about the ones who don't come back, and we try not to make up stories to explain what we don't know. On the anniversary of Sterling's death, I went to the penthouse study alone. I opened the windows and let summer air push at the curtains like a breath you didn't know you were holding. I set 3 photographs on the desk: Patricia with the green eyes I see in mirrors, Sterling in a tie loosened like he wanted to be a person, and Dorothy at the kitchen table, that look that used to puzzle me and now reads like a diagnosis. I lit a candle because sometimes ritual is how you talk to ghosts without lying. I'm spending your money, I told the room. I'm spending it like you asked me to, on people who didn't ask to be the important part of someone else's story. I'm spending it until the zeros scare men who love zeros. I'm spending it so another father doesn't have to apologize with a hand that shakes. The city flickered like a heartbeat. The candle guttered and steadied. I took that as permission, or as nothing, and either way it worked. If you're listening because you like vengeance that lands with a sting, I get it. I used to want that too. Some days part of me still does. I could have crushed Dennis in court for the lawsuit he filed, and for the nights he stole from me with a shove and a laugh. I could have cancelled Marlene with a headline. Instead, I mailed 2 checks and kept my name out of their mouths by living far from their hunger. The best revenge I've learned is a ledger that includes lines they'll never see, therapy bills paid for strangers, plane tickets to reunions we don't film, rent caught up for a single mother whose landlord doesn't care about lost documents and new truths. My name is Christopher Sterling Rothwell III. I was stolen by my aunt and found by a father who refused to surrender to statistics. My name is also Nathan Bridgewater, the man who learned how to keep lights on when the power company thought otherwise. I carry both names like tools. One opens certain doors. The other reminds me who I'm walking in for. If this story tells you anything, let it be this: family isn't the paper your name is printed on or the address on an envelope. Family is who tells the truth when it costs them, who shows up when the rain won't quit, who decides to love you on purpose. Sterling searched for me for 38 years and found me in time to say goodbye. I search for others now, hoping they get more time than we did. The Rothwell Foundation has helped 43 people step into rooms where answers live. We won't stop because a ledger of wrongs doesn't balance itself. And if you've been living with a question that scares you, know this: the answer might break you for a while, and then it might build you into someone who can carry it. I am built from 2 names and all the weight they bring. I am not whole, but I am useful. That's enough. If this story touched your heart or reminded you that family isn't always what it seems like this video, share it with someone who needs proof that even the worst truths can be repurposed into something strong. And subscribe for more stories that don't end where you expect them to. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge is putting things back where they belong.